Hi guys, welcome to 20 something or other podcast. My name is Charlotte
And I'm Jemima.
and today we're going to be talking to you about our favourite books.
As if we didn't touch on that already. But hey, let's do a full episode.
So, what exactly are we going to talk about in this?
Well, we're writing notes for this because we're prepared. I was thinking, it's like just having the discussion of how do you choose a favourite book? At what point do you put it on that Goodreads shelf and make it a favourite?
Ooh.
Because I'm never sure. Like, 'cause there are plenty of books I've rated 5 stars which I haven't put on my favourite shelf. I'm just like, where is the line?
Well, you say this, it's so difficult for me to actually like pinpoint what my favourites is. Like whenever someone says like, what's your favourite book? My mind just goes blank. Yeah. Because I've read so many books and I have rated a fair amount 5 stars. But when someone asks, I'm just like, oh my god, like, I don't know.
Do I even read? Yeah, I find that difficult, because, like, I looked through my Goodreads favourite shelf, and I think there's 9 books on there. I did write them all down. And some of them I've read, like, several times, which I'm like, and I've enjoyed them every time, and I've thought they're really great, so I'm like, that's fine. Yeah. But some of them I've read once, and I'm like, I'm not sure whether I'm going to revisit them, and I'm like, should you be a favourite?
Then I've got books where I've only rated them, like, 4 stars, and yet I consider them more of a favourite than some 5-star reads.
Because one of the books that is on my Goodreads shelf is The Secret and Diaries of Anne Lister. And I rated that a 4 because some of it I don't care. Yeah. But some of it, it's so, like, validating and amazing. And I'm like, that I was like, that is a favourite book. Because, and if you look at my physical copy, I tabbed it so much because so much of it was so, like, important and great. But, like, it's a 4-star book.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Because I've got that. I've read The Shining by Stephen King twice and rated it 5 stars both times, and I really enjoy it. But there are some parts of the story where I don't quite get what he was trying to do, because he has this habit of writing in really mysterious ways that are more for him than the reader. Yeah. Like, he's the only one that can understand it. But then I've read Misery by him. I've only read it once. I need to reread it because I might change my mind. And I rated that 4 stars, and yet whenever anyone asks me what my favourite Stephen King book is, I say Misery, not The Shining. So
it's like that. I think if you look at B. Schwab's books, because she is one of my favourite authors, like, most of her books I've rated 3 stars or up. Yeah. So that they're all pretty solid. And for a long time, A Dark Shade of Magic was on there. I just checked. It's not on there anymore. Vicious is, and Vicious was one. First time I picked up Vicious I DNF'd it. Yeah. But I've read it 3 times now and I love it. Nice. And I'm just like, well, you're clearly a favourite, because every time I've gone back to it,
you've enjoyed it.
I've enjoyed it, and I've gone, these characters, and so that's
that to me is like why I have some of my favourites that I do, if that makes sense. Yeah. Like I have favourites, but they're favourites for different reasons. For example, like Game of Thrones and the entire Song of Ice and Fire series is like my all-time favourite, because of like the characters and how in-depth they are, and just the breadth and variety of them, and there's so many, and then the plot and how intricate and well thought out that is. But then some of my other favourites, like A Streetcar Named Desire, for instance, it's slightly different because it's a play, so you can't compare it in the same ways as you can to a novel. But that's my favourite because of like the tone of it, and just how melancholy and despairing and bloody miserable it is, actually. Yeah. And I actually really dislike most of the characters in that. I think Blanche can be annoying and whiny, and Stanley, or is that even his name?
I haven't read.
It's been a long time. I need to reread it. But Marlon Brando, his character, which I think it is Stanley, isn't it? I can't remember. He is a pig, basically, and I think he's absolutely disgusting, and yet I absolutely adore the story.
With King Lear, because King Lear is one of mine, and I think it's possibly for nostalgia reasons, because in a blog post I wrote last year, I described it as my gateway into Shakespeare. Yeah. And I think that's partially the reason. Also, like, the characters aren't great in that. There's maybe one character who I truly like. Yeah. And he's part of a subplot, and he's one of 3 characters who's alive at the end. I'm like, yes, Edgar, you do really well. But, like, the rest of them, like, you're all problematic. You've all done bad things. It's your fault you're in this mess.
But I can't stop reading about you.
But I'm like, I want to talk about you. And I wrote that down about King Lear. I was like, I think it's nostalgia, but also I really enjoy thinking and talking about these characters academically. Like, I get to do King Lear again at university this year, and I'm so excited to go back to it.
I think that could be a big reason why I enjoyed A Streetcar Named Desire, because I only ever read it because I was studying it at college, and admittedly I didn't spend long studying it because I ended up getting kicked out of the college, but that's a story for another day. But yeah, because we studied it and we were looking at it in a different light to how I normally look at books, I think that factored into my enjoyment, and normally that can kind of put me off things, but looking at it deeper kind of made me appreciate it more.
I find that a lot with plays especially.
Yeah, I think it kind of made me look past the fact that these characters are shit and really appreciate why they act the way they do.
Especially a lot of plays around that time, because I think it's around the same time as Death of Salesman, which I did at A-level. It's kind of just like this really heavy commentary on society and what it's doing, and I'm like, yeah, that's really important, that's great. So like, I think when you look at it like, okay, why are these characters doing it, I think you kind of consider it a bit more work, as opposed to if you were sat just watching it for entertainment. I'm not sure I would enjoy King Lear if I was sat watching it for entertainment. It's extremely violent and gory, and I did go and see it and I was just like, this is amazing. But I'm not a person who typically likes gory stuff, so it's not that, it's just I find it all very interesting. There's so many unanswered questions when it comes to King Lear, and I love that, and I love just trying to work out what this one line means in this one scene. And I especially looking at it as a tragedy, if you look at like the tragic elements, that's what I really enjoy as well.
And like going off that kind of, I find with Game of Thrones especially, and other things that have got that kind of depth to the characters, I can kind of apply some psychology to it and kind of see things that I've learned in that, and it kind of ties together like two of the things that I really enjoy, like psychology, the subject, and studying that, but then obviously books and reading. And it's not often, especially on like the university courses, that you can do that and have that kind of tie-in, so when I can, I think that also like improves my enjoyment, I guess.
I mean, I think you mentioned that you have favourites for different reasons, and another upcoming blog post, which I don't know which will ever make it out, I've spoken about Carol and why I love Carol so much and why I consider it a favourite, and it's because, I hope I get this right, at the time it was published in the 1950s, a lot of the available female-female relationships in books were horrific, over-sexualised, awful. Carol was one of the books that didn't do that. So that kind of, I'm not saying it's the only book that did that. There are clearly going to be others that I just don't know about. But because it did that at that time, what it did for queer literature, I really appreciate that book. And that's why it's going to be one of my favourites. Like, the characters, again, not necessarily the greatest. Like how I think about the characters changed so much. But that's why I consider it a favourite, because of what it did for queer literature and how that is important to me, and how that's clearly going to have a knock-over effect to the literature we have now. So that's why it's on there. You should read Carol by Patricia Highsmith, it's great.
But you see, like, I've got another favourite is Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman, and like I hate Neil Gaiman, like, not personally, obviously, like, let me rephrase
You don't get along with his writing.
I hate his novels. I have read Stardust and oh god, I can't even remember.
I watched read Coraline, but that's because I like the film.
I've read Stardust, The Ocean at the End of the Lane, The Sleeper and the Spindle, and I think I've tried.
I don't think I've read any of his novels.
I have, and I don't get on with his writing at all. I don't enjoy it. I don't enjoy the way he writes and tells stories. And yet I love Norse mythology by him. And I said this before, like, when I read it, that it's the way his writing's really weird, but it fits the Norse myths.
I've read Norse mythology and I didn't like it, but I think that might be in the writing for me.
Yeah, because I love the Norse myths. They're like my favourite things. That's why it's like one of my favourite books. And I don't know, it's a really weird one, because I absolutely hate him as an author, and yet I absolutely love that book. And it still kind of creates this conflict in me to this day. But I think it's just because his weird writing works with the weird stories. And because it wasn't a novel of his own devising and his own story, I could accept it, I guess.
Yeah, I have this with favourite authors. So, like, The Importance of Being Honest and other plays, like, this collection of them are on my favourites list. Oscar Wilde wasn't a great person, and I am, like, more than willing to be like, he was awful.
Yeah.
But I'm like, should you be on my favourites then if you were a horrific person? And I think it's when you have to take into account separating the work from the author.
Yeah, I think that's very important sometimes.
Yeah.
Especially with classics.
Yeah, with classics, and when you're doing a degree on them, like,
yeah.
Sometimes you'll read about these people and you're like, this is horrible. Like, I as loads of people know, I love Shakespeare, but let's face it, he wasn't going to be the greatest person. He probably wasn't loyal to his wife. That's not great, but I still like his work.
I think nowadays, though, it can be a little trickier because it's very easy if someone has written, like, say, a book that features racism heavily as, like, a kind of cultural thing. For instance, like The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas.
Yeah.
That's very easy to sit back and say, like, well, yes, there's racism in her book, but of course she doesn't condone it because she's written it as, like, a social commentary and she herself has been very outspoken against it. And
it's a book that's kind of encouraging, like, this protest and this change. Yeah,
but of course you have to show the bad that these people are fighting against.
Yeah.
However, I find it, especially nowadays, to do the opposite way round is more difficult. For instance, if someone's written, I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but I want to say Ready Player One. Like, people adore that and it's a bit of like a cult classic, but Orson Scott Card is one hell of a homophobe. And I think
I knew people had a problem with, like, that book for some reason, but I didn't know why.
I'm pretty sure he is, like, horrifically homophobic, and I find that it's things like that are harder to differentiate between now, because you can be like, oh, this is an amazing book and I absolutely love it, but
didn't want that, and you don't really want to support people like that.
But at the same time, you like what you like, and if you can recognise a good book that doesn't have any problems, and that to me is when it gets tricky, because in a way, by reading the book, you still kind of are supporting their agendas, but you're not because it's not in the book.
And that's not what you like it, hopefully.
So
I think another book I really enjoyed, which is probably one of my favourite kind of queer books, is Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe. Nice long name there. But it's got two timelines, and part of it's set in the 30s in Deep South in a predominantly black community.
Yeah.
And, you know, the KKK show up. And I'm just like, well, that's horrific. And it's horrible and I hate reading it. And when I watched the film before I read the book, and I found the film so upsetting and so uncomfortable that I'm surprised I sat and watched all of it.
Yeah.
So whenever I mention that book online, I do tend to put in brackets, like, I'm going to put these warnings in because it is horrific.
Yeah.
But that is what it was like at the time.
Yeah.
But I'm not excusing it. It's accurate because that's what it was like for those people in the 30s
it's not an
or
excuse.
the 20s.
It's like a fact almost.
Yeah, it's like life was like that.
Yeah, you can't dismiss
Escape
that.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's whenever because I read a lot of historical fiction, like when I love reading books which are just like, here's an environment where women can do stuff, but I'm like, that's not completely accurate.
Yeah.
And I'm currently reading a YA called An Assassin's Guide to Love and Treason. And, like, some of it doesn't feel like it can be, like, it might have happened, but it feels a little bit far-fetched to be completely... But I love it still because it's kind of got that... If you've read Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue, it kind of feels the same, like, same kind of vibe, like, very fun, going through history.
Yeah.
And I like that, but I also acknowledge that it's maybe not as completely accurate. But again, Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue, Mackenzie Lee, I think she did a history degree, so she's obviously got that knowledge.
Yeah.
So it's grounded in something.
Yeah, but then you come to the argument of, like, should it be historically accurate or should it be, like, politically correct? And I think this is where the fantasy argument comes in, because I love fantasy and I adore it, but when you get really horrible, misogynistic, homophobic worlds and people try to justify it as, oh, well, it's historically accurate, it's just kind of like, well, you've got dragons.
I know. I saw something on Twitter yesterday that someone said that they were bored of, like, these really restrictive societies. You have dragons in your books, why can't, like, women have rights? And I was like, thank you.
And it's like, as much as I love Game of Thrones, I'm not trying to say it's perfect, because, like, I know it's not, but in some ways you do have your strong female characters. Like, look at Cersei. She took the Iron Throne from men and is essentially ruling, well, I say ruling, Cersei's not perfect, but we'll get into her another day when Jemima's not here, because she's not a fan of Game of Thrones.
No.
But Cersei is the queen. She's ruling the Seven Kingdoms. She's a boss-ass bitch doing it. And then, of course, you've got Daenerys, who, like, overthrows the patriarchy with the Khalasar and the whole, I've forgotten their name, the Dothraki, that's it. She becomes Khaleesi, and you've got that. But then there's the element of George R. R. Martin took inspiration from The Wars of the Roses. So there are going to be elements where it's like, oh, women can't fight, and then there's the whole plot with Brienne and how you can't be a knight, you're a woman, and if you're a woman, then ha ha ha, we're going to make like lesbian jokes about you and stuff. So it's not perfect, and I don't agree with the kind of historical justification, because like...
It's fantasy.
Yeah, you don't have to have that...
It's not real.
Yeah, you don't need that outdated attitude in your fantasy when you can literally have dragons flying about.
Yeah, that's something I've noticed. Like, the ones I've written down here, a lot of the main characters, like the protagonists in these books, are men in my favourites.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. But similarly, like Vicious, this character called Sydney, she's 13, I think. And I adore her. She's not necessarily like the most badass kind of person ever.
Yeah.
Because she's still young, she's still got that vulnerability, but I love her.
Yeah.
And she's so great. She does have so much better.
And that's another thing. Yeah, that's a big thing why I like Game of Thrones, because you've got like the really tough characters. Like, one of the best examples is Arya and Sansa Stark. Like, they're sisters and they are complete opposite ends of the spectrum. Like, you can turn around and say like, oh, Arya's a tomboy, she's got masculine traits, and no, she hasn't, because she is a girl and she identifies herself as a girl, so her traits are like feminine because that's how she identifies. But then you've got Sansa, who does the traditionally feminine things, but it's like the duality of man almost. Yeah, and I love that.
Like, I appreciate putting like really badass women out there, but I'm like, don't forget about the more sensitive ones, or showing a sensitive side, because
you can be a badass woman while still liking pink and wearing a dress.
Yeah, in fact, I support everyone who does that.
Like, I don't like the book anymore, but a good example of this is Throne of Glass and Selena Sardothian. She's this badass assassin and stuff, but then in the same breath she then goes, oh, but I love wearing like fancy dresses and I love getting dressed up.
Yeah.
And like, you can do that.
I think another character in Vicious, who's Sydney's big sister Serena, she is like, she's not great, like what she can do isn't great and what she does isn't great, but she's so like typically feminine about it, which I kind of love, even though I don't know what she does.
Yeah, but there's something about seeing like a badass woman in heels, like that you're like killing a man or something, you know, doing something like proper masculine, but she's doing it with like bright red lipstick on. You know, and like vice versa with men. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think with Vicious, like something I've written down is like the characters are something that I just connect with. Well, not connect with because they've all got powers, but like
emotionally.
I just like reading about them, and everyone says it about Vicious. Like if someone's writing a review or talking about Vicious, they'll say, "Oh, the character, like it's a morally great book," and I'm like, I agree with that. Yeah. And I read it last week and I hadn't felt how morally great it was until that, because you have two students and usually most people will kind of come down on one side, and I've always been on one side with Victor and not with Eli, but I began reading it and I was going, Victor's terrible. Yeah. Like, what is he doing? And I was like, do I really like Victor? Is this the side that I've come down on? And by the end of the book I was like, no, Victor. But like, it's just like every time, and I know a lot of people who read Vengeful were like, whoa, maybe Eli's got valid reasons, and I think they've both got valid reasons for what they do. I didn't like Vengeful as much, but I think it's because Victor did things I didn't like. I was like, no!
How dare you?
I threw a little paddy because I couldn't have my way with Victor. That sounded weird. But yeah, I think that's part of the reason. And also like in Vicious you have this really kind of quite big character who's like tattooed and he's got a bald head, so he looks quite like,
tough and masculine,
tough. But he has some of like the softest moments with Sydney, and I was just like, oh, Mitch.
Yeah, and it's
like, oh, I love seeing that in a book, which is probably why I love this book.
I think it's a big testament to the author as well, to be able to blend that and make it so realistic, because
and make it feel real. Like Mitch, at the beginning of the book, you find that Victor and Mitch are broken out of prison, like because Mitch literally has like, he looks like he's probably murdered a man. Yeah. But spoilers. You find out Mitch actually went into prison for hacking. Yeah. So it wasn't anything like physically violent. Yeah. And I was like, oh, Mitch.
And I'm not the writer here, Jemima is, but I feel like it could be quite easy to fall into like caricatures. And being like,
I think it is.
Yeah, like I've got this character who looks really tough and stuff, so obviously they've got to be. But no, you can balance the, you know.
I think balancing it is brilliant. And you're making really interesting characters to explore.
And I think that is a theme in most of my favourite books, to be honest. Like Game of Thrones, like you can't trust anyone in Game of Thrones. Everyone's got aspects of things, and there's such a variety of strong characters and soft characters. And then, like, Streetcar Named Desire, they're not great. I don't like any of them, and yet you can't help but feel sorry for Blanche because she is going through some shit, and you just kind of want to protect her, even though she's really annoying.
Yeah. I find that, if we're going quickly back to historical, but, like, accurate, The Wave All Flesh, which I've read twice, really love it. I think it's a great book about Edinburgh and medicine, and there's murder mysteries. And the main character, Will, there's a scene where he comes across this man who's clearly been beating his wife.
Yeah.
And Will really goes hard on him and threatens him. And in that moment, like, Will, at this point, I think he's only like 18, he's quite young.
Yeah.
But I was just like, if men like you existed in this time, I'm thankful.
Yeah.
Like, because like every time I've read that scene, I was just like, yeah, that Will, you're a really good character, and I really appreciate his character. I think he again, many flaws, but I really like him as a character as well.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing, when characters can do something good like that and yet then still be like completely despicable in everything else they do. I love that, and I think that's why some of my favourite books are my favourite books. Like, going back to Norse mythology, the character of well, he's not really a character because he was considered a god by many people following the religion.
With mythology.
Yeah,
it's just like people believed in this, but right now at the moment we treat it as fiction.
Yeah, but I will say character as in like character as a person, not as in character as in fictional. His character is that, you know, he brings about Ragnarok and the doom of the gods, and yet he also helps them. Like, there's one story, I won't bore you with the whole thing, but they're trying to build a wall around Asgard, and they're trying to trick the builder into doing it, and they don't want him to win the bet, but Loki then is just like, oh shit, he's going to win, I'll help the gods out and, you know, like, make it so that he loses. And you're just like, oh yeah, that's good, he's done that. But then at the same time, you've doomed everyone else through your actions, and you're a bit of a dick, basically.
Yeah, I think there's moments like that in Vicious, like both characters, Eli and Victor, they'll do something and you're like, that was really good, and like a few chapters later they do something else.
That was really bad.
No, stop it. So yeah, but the thing is, like, as you get through the book, you kind of see, I think it kind of shifts, because at the beginning, like, what's going on, like, Eli's reasons seem much more valid, and then what Victor's doing, you're like, okay, you're acting out of jealousy here, this isn't great. And then it shifts, like, you learn what Eli's beginning to do and his reasons for it, and you're like, that's ridiculous, stop it. And then Victor's trying to stop this, and you're like, yes, Victor, good. And then it's just that kind of mix.
I think we've just kind of established that what we class as a favourite book is a book that kind of keeps you on your toes a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's not black and white. It has these kind of muddy areas of, is this person good? Is it bad? Do I like them? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like with King Lear, like, I will be like, it's his fault he's in this mess. And I studied that book for 2 years, and then I'm doing it at university, and I keep going back to it. Every time I read it, I'm like, Lear, you're an absolute fool. You're an idiot. And I just get so frustrated because it's his fault he's in this mess. But also, another reason I love King Lear is that there is the subplot which has the Earl of Gloucester and his 2 children. One of them is illegitimate, one of his legitimate children. And one of those scenes, watching it, is so emotional. I would say more emotional than the main plot. And, like, I've said to people, if I see another production of King Lear, I think I will just rate it on that scene. Because, like, if that scene's done well, I will be bawling my eyes out.
Yeah, and you can, like, forgive every other sin that it's...
Yeah, I'm just like, okay, that didn't happen, but, like...
But, yeah, this one scene was really good,
Yeah, like, well done. So, yeah, when I saw it first time, I didn't cry. Like, I'm a person who can cry easily. I didn't cry, but I definitely got a bit like, oh,
choked up.
Choked up. So Shakespeare can make me emotional. I feel like not many people have an emotive response to Shakespeare, but
I feel like that's another good indicator of something that you're, like, passionate about and really love, because, like, for me, the last season of Game of Thrones, like, at this point in my life now that it's been a few months, I'm not mad, I'm just horrifically disappointed. But as it was airing, oh my god, like, my anger and, like, the thing about me is, like, Jemima cries easily. I get angry really easily.
Yeah.
But I am a person who cries when I'm angry.
Yeah, I do that.
But if something can elicit such a...
emotion from you.
Yeah, something so strong, and, I mean, like, it doesn't take much with me. You know, like, Tesco could stock the wrong kind of bread and I'd be like, how dare they do this to me? They hate me. But the fact that Game of Thrones did that to me really solidified the fact that, oh yeah, this is my favourite because they've done it wrong in my eyes.
Yeah,
and
I think when you're passionate about something,
yeah,
you can tell. I think it's the experience I have at university. You can tell when a tutor is talking about one of their favourite books, because you can see that passion. They want you all to care. Like, we care about this book too. So I think that's why with Vicious I was not disappointed, underwhelmed. Is because I think Vicious, I'm just like, yeah, this is great. And Vengeful, I was just like, it's not what I wanted, it's not where I wanted it to go. And I think part of the reason I like Vicious so much is because it has like multiple timelines, but it's got this academic timeline when they're at university, and then you don't really have that in Vengeful, and I was like, I want the university place. So yeah, I really like books which have the academic setting, so like Dark Academia. Most of them I rate, like, I read Secret History, I rated it 3 stars, and I have so many problems with it. But the writing was really, really good. But one I have enjoyed was If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, which I feel like it was so close to being a favourite. I rated it 4.5 stars, but there was the ending
kind of
really not let me down. I don't know whether I should find it problematic or not. But I rated that 4.5, and it's got like Shakespeare involved. It's students who are acting, but they focus on Shakespeare. So Shakespeare is all through it. They're quoting Shakespeare everywhere. I was living my dream. It was great. So yeah, more books with academic settings is what I want, please. Thanks. But, is that it? Have we had enough of a ramble?
Yeah, I can't think of anything else to add. So
I would just be telling everyone to read a variety of books. So
yeah, same.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's fine.
So yeah, let us know your favourite book.
Yeah.
If it's one of the ones we mentioned, then like good for you. You win bonus points.
If there's a book that you think would like by what we've spoken about.
Yeah.
And what we've said is our favourite thing.
Yeah. So to like recap that, I really like fantasy and kind of darker stories with a lot of morally grey ambiguity and
muddy areas.
Yeah.
I don't know. I like historical. I like Shakespeare. And that's pretty much. I think most of my favourite books have a historical aspect to them other than Vicious.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Or anything like Vicious.
But then you see my favourites, like, just quickly before we go, some of the favourites that I've listed for this were Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin, Misery and Cell by Stephen King, Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman, After the Fire by Will Hill, The Selection by Kiera Cass, a wild card for you all, and A Streetcar Named Desire by Tennessee Williams.
Okay, shall I list off mine?
Yes.
Okay, so I've got 9 here. Have fun. Vicious by V.U. Schwab. The Secret Diaries of Miss Anne Lister by Anne Lister. The Way of All Flesh by Ambrose Parry. Carol by Patricia Highsmith. Maurice by E.M. Foster, one I need to reread. The Private Lives of the Tudors by Tracy Borman. The Importance of Being Earnest in Other Plays by not by King Lear.
By Oscar Wilde.
By Oscar Wilde and King Lear by William Shakespeare. My favourite Oscar Wilde play in that collection is An Ideal Husband. I love Lord Goring as a character. He's very flamboyant and I live for it. So
yeah, anything in the same kind of vein as any of those, like feel free to recommend to us.
I need to read Tennessee Williams.
Yeah, and I probably need to read some of
Aussie.
Yeah. So
okay.
Yeah, on that note,
we will go.
If you heard that was my stomach. It's time for lunch.
Yeah, we're going to go get lunch now.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.